All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Today is Wednesday, so it's Wednesday church service.
Wednesday church service, and if we have time, a little sexy time with Sam because it's funny. But
And because it kind of ties in, because we're moving on from creation-ish and
mhm,
to the Garden of Eden.
mhm.
And I'm curious, but before we do that, you had some stuff you want to kind of recap and revisit from our creation.
Yeah, being at the beginning of this episode, it's good to recap the last discussion. Anyways, it's
Hmm.
there. Episode what is 123?
I think so.
Yeah, 123. It is 2 hours long, so very detailed version of what I'm going to spell out. Basically, we started with the creation story, and the debate surrounds the evidence of from your perspective that the nature of the creation story, the uniqueness of the creation
Hmm.
story being the first that it is a creation manifesting outside of nature and speaking nature into existence is part of the evidence of the creation itself being the,
Hmm.
the source. Whereas my stance was basically it was a natural evolution of all religion based on the societal changes that were being made at the time. So I think that's a pretty quick overview.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, and now the one thing when I kind of re-listened to it that was a little bit of a hang up that I wanted to go over, and maybe more for the audience than for you, but it's a kind of a little bit on the scientific method to begin with. And this is where you were kind of trying to come to me with trying to win with both sides, both flips of the coin. Heads, I win. Tails, you lose.
Hmm.
Uh, but that's not how it's the method. You're great with rationality, but you're still you don't always revert back to the method of it. Rationality and the scientific method are different. Rationality can it, scientific method is a tool used to for rational thinking. Rationality can be done multiple ways, right? So rationality is a more general term. The tool being used to try to take your biases out of it is the scientific method. And in the scientific method, you never try to prove the null hypothesis. And where we're coming at this differently is the null hypothesis is we don't know what started everything, what got everything going, what created the life, the universe, and everything. The null hypothesis we don't know. And so you have a hypothesis that it is you and every Christian in the world that it was God. And these are the evidences you're bringing forward for your hypothesis. And my hypothesis, counter hypothesis, is it's a natural progression of religious thinking to begin with. But the null hypothesis is we don't know. So whatever evidence I bring forward, if it doesn't prove my point, it still doesn't revert back to, oh, God must exist. It reverts back to, well, we still don't know. Whereas then, if your hypothesis has enough evidence behind it to bring around the way of thinking, then, well, now we've narrowed it down. And that's the difference between the scientific method. It's not trying to have a win even though you lost. It's the fact that the default isn't your position. This is not a zero sum game. The default is we don't know.
Well, I feel like I addressed that when I talked about where faith comes into it, because my position was more than just we don't know. It was we can't know.
Well, which is why you never try to prove the null hypothesis. You never
Well,
can know.
no, except that because we can't ever know, because this is a metaphysical question, not a physical question, that we have to come to our our best guess what makes the most sense. Okay, so it's not about proving or disproving. It's about what to you makes the most sense.
So I will revise your hypothesis is that the God creation that is laid out here is the one that makes the most sense.
Hmm.
Whereas mine, if I was to put it in the same wording, is that this is again a natural progression of people trying to make sense of the world around them.
It, and I think that's an important point because it is something that both sides get hung up on. And you don't want to use it as a crutch, but I think this is a special circumstance because, this isn't us, you know, arguing critical race theory or something, and then you fall back on that as a fallacy, as a crutch, um, which you've brought up way back when we first started talking about that is how circular their reasoning can be of, basically you have to prove that you're not a racist and you can't because,
Mhm.
right? So you can fall kind of into the same kind of logical traps in just about anything, but I think when it comes to uh when it comes to a cosmology, that is a special case because at some point, and this was kind of Aquinas's reasoning, was at some point you eventually get to a first cause, before which there was literally nothing. Okay? So at some point both sides of the argument break down and you have to revert to, okay, well, let me phrase it this way, that and this is where I think we get back to our friend Berlinski, and where I read him differently is is him taking the piss out of Dawkins, because you can't talk in that degree of absolute because you can't know. In the same way that even a creationist, a Christian arguing from the other side, to be intellectually honest, you have to admit, I don't know for sure. I could be wrong. I don't think I am. I both think that I am not wrong and I have faith that I'm not wrong, but I could be. That's the only intellectually honest position.
Here's what Berlinski excelled at. He excelled at baiting people into the argument of non-existence.
Hmm.
Whereas this is where I've been trying to go, and I guess I needed to spell it out a little bit more clear, which is why I wanted the introduction. Is the onus is actually on the believer to convince me that this is correct. The onus isn't on me to disprove this. Now, if everything that you bring forward to me, I have an answer for, that's just telling you you're not bringing me down the road that this is the most correct answer. This is the Occam's razor. If something is more likely to be true, that is the most simple answer. And so far, most of the things that we brought forward pretty much had a simple answer for. Well, not a simple answer, but one that fits along the line of
One that satisfies you.
human behavior, and
Hmm.
no human behavior and human no that's why the debate's here, because it's supposed to satisfy whoever's listening.
Yeah, well, yes.
My goal is not to make an unbeliever out of you or anybody in the audience. My goal is to make somebody in the audience think about it, and if they come to the decision after thinking about it, hearing all parts of the that should strengthen their faith.
Well, but that's why I say that it's an answer that satisfies you, because obviously it doesn't satisfy me because I was offering rebuttal to your arguments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in the same way that if someone became convinced of one side or the other, or more convinced of the side they're already on, then it would be because that makes sense to you, which I think is an important clarification. And while we're clarifying, the thought I had in reflecting on our last discussion was I had made the point that from my perspective, also, it seemed like there was a point where you were heads I win, tails you lose, and we kind of got derailed and round in circles, and I was thinking about that, and it kind of dawned on me what I was going at there, uh, and so point of clarification, it seemed to me, and I'm gonna use my example of when we get into ritual versus magic.
Mm-hmm.
So ritual is important. You have talked in our fitness talks about meditating, and that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be, tantric yoga with, the candles and the hot
Well,
yoga and all that.
a good Christian example, a good Catholic example is the rosary. The rosary is actually designed not it's not the power of the words you're saying over and over and over again. It's the fact that you have an internal belief in a memorized phrase that you say over and over again, and you create a meditative state.
Hmm.
The rosary is designed to create a meditative state.
And you've talked about brain studies of, looking at the brain when people are meditating or praying or whatever, and it does do something to your brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know exactly what yet, but it definitely does
I've got
something.
some fun theories on some of it.
Oh, okay. Well, setting that aside, but
Excuse me, fun hypotheses. Got to use my
the
words correctly.
so the example I used was, is my warm-up routine magic? And your answer seemed to be to me that basically if you believe in a higher power, then any ritual you do is thus magic. And that was what I was getting at, was the heads I win, tails you lose, because my point was in showing that the Judeo-Christian tradition and philosophy theology was inherently different from everything else because it was not magical. And your point was, well, of course it was magical because you believe in a higher power.
No, I
And to me, that's the same as you saying I'm falling back on the null hypothesis. It's a, you know, I can never convince you that this is something that is rational and divorced from, the magic of all pagan religions, because in your mind, if you believe in a higher power at all, then you believe in magical thinking.
uh it's well, I think that's where we were trying to clarify the words when we went round
Hmm.
and round was if you're doing this ritual expecting a supernatural interference for the result, but just because a phenomenon of nature is that rituals can end up improving the result, still doesn't have that supernatural component to it. So you're taking a natural phenomenon and
Hmm.
trying to attach something to it. And and so when it comes to by definition magic, you are expecting a supernatural result. My example was please guide this doctor's hands in
Hmm.
this surgery. Well, the prayer may have helped with his confidence, may have relieved his nerves, may have done something psychologically, as Big Brain Sapolsky talks about the psychological effects of religion. But it doesn't mean that there was actually a supernatural effect to it. It was the meditative state. It was the confidence. It was, the brain chemistry of someone who is reassured of their ability. It doesn't matter where it came from, is the problem. If you had given a talk to a secular surgeon and said, just remember all your years of practice, it would have ended up having the same psychological result, improved surgery. So you can't take a natural phenomenon and say, well, we do this, and so it's not magic. You're still invoking something by giving it the supernatural meaning. Because if I told that same doctor and I very convincingly said, God doesn't exist, but you've got this, he would have messed that up, or he would have been more likely to.
That's still not addressing my heads I win, tails you lose point,
That's
that
the point of the null hypothesis. There is no loss.
you're going to have to expound on that.
You may have failed to prove your hypothesis, but the null hypothesis existed already. It's not a loss. Again, it's not a zero-sum game. You're
Okay,
making the case to support your hypothesis that the words of this book are true.
then let me phrase it a different way. Uh, I'm trying to make an objective case, and you're being wholly subjective. Because from the position that I see you arguing from, I can never make an objective case that while there is an invocation to the supernatural, it is not hocus pocus magic, because there is not an incantation to the supernatural realm to manipulate the supernatural realm. Because your position is it doesn't matter if you are calling on or believing in a higher power at all, it's hocus pocus magical thinking, and it's all silly nonsense.
Well, here's a way you can make the case: is if you come up with a situation that I can't explain by natural means, but then you would have to call it magic because it had a supernatural component.
Well, that's the same as someone saying, "Hey, I'll believe in Jesus if I see him, come down from the heavens." Well, that's a silly rebuttal.
Yeah, that is a silly rebuttal because it's not even in this book that that's going to happen. But which is again this that I take as a support of my side, because again the natural progression was to move to the abstract, because once we moved away from a more small scale culture where you basically anecdote could be the proof to larger populations, where the anecdote became the exceptions to rules, and people started noticing that, you had to shift it to keep the belief going. I gave the example of the Egyptians. Why did ultimately Egyptian religion fail? Because the pharaoh wasn't a god. And eventually, when you get enough people together and you get enough evidence in front of everybody's eyes, people will finally realize, oh my gosh, this person's not God.
Because he couldn't stop the climate change that was causing problems. He couldn't stop the
Exactly.
invaders that were pressing in on their borders.
Or one was not smooth enough. Not every ruler was equal, right?
Yeah,
You get the one up there that's very convincing of the speech, and basically 1984 is everything, to where what you thought you heard him say one day, they changed the prediction later. We're going to have an abundant harvest this year because these signs of the gods and because of my blessings, and they have a drought. A smooth enough speaker may be able to spin that on its head. Whereas you get a less competent pharaoh, they couldn't do that enough times that everybody starts going, maybe his blessings aren't divine. Maybe this is, and that's where being tied to nature was more primitive, because when you didn't have this large scale understanding that can basically collectively put these patterns together, then anecdote will do. That time this guy danced and it rained, well, there's evidence for you.
all right, but I want to put a pin in that because I still say you're just factually wrong historically with that. Not that you're wrong in that, you know, hypothetically this, you know, this represents a natural progression of thinking to, the more complex, the more abstract. But that historically it didn't happen. I still want to stay on the magical hocus pocus for a second. One of my thoughts in thinking back was, you know, I can see why you would look at the praying over the surgeon's hands and then thanking God when the surgeon went well as silly. But then again, to me, that's just as silly as if you had been an atheist at that point and then were suddenly convinced that God is real because of that. To me, that would be equally as silly.
Oh, it would be silly to me as well.
But then is it not silly for you to take that as some kind of evidence that, wait, this stuff is all nonsense?
No, no, now you're conflating two arguments. The argument about magic was that if there is a supernatural component to the invocation, then it is by definition magic.
No.
If there is not, it is by definition not magic. So you're saying all the not magic is still evidence of the
No, no,
supernatural.
no. See, what I've been trying to say is that your definition is wrong because it is based on your bias that anything involving the supernatural is all the same. It's all hocus pocus nonsense.
Well, because you
Uh,
can't, because there is a regular physiological effect to this that explains the answer.
no, and I'm trying to just put that aside for the second.
No, if there wasn't, then it would be magic. And if there was actual magic, I would probably believe, yes. But there isn't. This is the problem. This is the reason this worked, but it's also the problem. The reason it worked is because they abstracted it so much that this argument can go circular no matter what. The reason why it's a problem is that if you're trying to convince somebody who can understand the reasons why things work in the world, there is no possible way. Because again, the onus is on the believer to convince the non-believer. It's
Okay,
not the other way around.
right,
Unless they had a counter religion they're trying to convince you of.
but you're basically saying unless you can perform magic, you can never convince me.
No, I'm just saying that
And you are establishing the definitions, the rules for the game. You're establishing the rules for the game of any invocation to the supernatural is always going to be magic. So I'd better see lightning come out of your fingers
no,
or it's
any
nonsense.
invocation that actually works is magic. That's why I
No,
say
no,
magic
okay,
doesn't
okay,
exist to begin with.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
I
No,
think
no, magic would make the argument a lot easier.
I okay. I think I see where the hang up here is because um not only am I saying that magic is not real, but uh that's a major point of the biblical creation story. Is
Mhm.
its entire point is to also say magic isn't real. There
And
is a
so,
creator who exists outside of time and space who set all this into motion and created the entirety of everything you see around you.
which going forward, this is where I was going, and that's why it might not have been the best discussion during that time because we talked about it and then we started talking about creation in the two episodes, two Sunday schools ago,
Hmm.
not the last one. I contend that this book in its writings, and again, you're going from different translations, which is why I'm curious for this whole conversation, but in how the religion itself is practiced by most people, they are implying the invocation of magic, especially with the term miracles. Miracles is another thing that implies a supreme. And you're right now, you just made the statement that outside of creation story, God does not intervene at all.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay, so then anytime he intervenes based on request,
Okay.
that's magic.
No.
Yes, it is. I invoke a superpower, and
No, be
superpower intervenes. The parting of the Red Sea, that would be magic.
no, it's not. Okay. All right, let me go back to Sarna here. Uh where is it? Okay. So this is him expounding further on the idea of let there be and how that is significant and different from and let's just keep it contemporary with Judaism because I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of Buddhism. Maybe we'll do that down the road.
Oh,
Um,
that was just an example of things that aren't your
mhm.
normal nature science or
it,
nature
it's
nature
certainly it is certainly
religion.
different from Western traditions, and by Western
Mhm.
I mean, you know, the Near East, the Middle East, and Europe, because a lot of philosophy comes out of the early civilizations of the Middle East, and then the Greek tradition, and then how that all influenced the Roman tradition. But I'm getting sidetracked. All right, so this is quoting from Sarna, page 12. It has been maintained that this notion of the creative power of the word is known to us from elsewhere in the ancient Near East, but the similarity is wholly superficial. For whatever is found, it has a because for wherever it is found, it has a magical content. The pronouncement of the right word, like the performance of the right magical actions, is able to, or rather, inevitably must actualize the potentialities which are inherent in the inert matter. In other words, it implies a mystic bond uniting matter to its manipulator. Worlds apart is the Genesis concept of creation by divine fiat. Notice how the Bible passes over in absolute silence the nature of the matter, if any, upon which the divine word acted creatively. Its presence or absence is of no importance, for there is no tie between it and God. Let there be, or as the psalmist echoed, he spoke, and it was so. refers not to the utterance of the magic word, but to the expression of the omnipotent, sovereign, unchallengeable will of the absolute transcendent God to whom all nature is completely subservient. Such a concept of God and of the process of creation added a new dimension to human thought and marked a new stage in the history of religion. It emancipated the mind from the limitations of mythopoetic thinking, and it liberated religion from the baneful influence of magic.
Yeah, it was
Okay, no, no, no. So
it was a
he,
nice abstraction to remove
but the abst
to remove the provable.
you're but that's the thing. You're dismissing the abstraction. No, that's the whole point. The point is the abstraction. The point is, as Sarna puts it, that when it comes to the pagan idea of magic, that uh, when you pronounce the right word or perform the right action, you inevitably must actualize the potentialities. In the Genesis account, there are no potentialities. There is no inherent power in inert matter. It's inert matter that all creation, and I can't remember if I talked about this or not, but there is a Hebrew word that is only used, the idea of create. It is only used in the Genesis account because it has the context. It implies the creation from nothing. So any other time something is made, it has to be made from a thing, unless God does it. So anytime man creates, he's just changing the matter that God already created. So there is no magic because all what the pagan religions would call magic, you are invoking the name of the one who actually created it, and he does answer prayer, but he doesn't always answer prayer. In the pagan idea, you you do the right thing, you do the right ritual, you say the right word the right way, and it will happen because there is inherent power in the matter itself. There is an inherent power that even the gods themselves are subservient to.
Okay, so here's the distinction. The person in the pagan religion who creates the lightning bolt, it is through their very nature of magical use that the lightning bolt was created. And in that is the magical word or whatever the hand signal or whatever the religion required at the
Mm-hmm.
time. So because I did this and because I have this innate power within me, that lightning bolt was created. Whereas in this sense, and not in the creation story, this is why I don't like that we're talking about it here, because this is God saying, let there be. I'm talking about when it's invoked later by people. They issue the prayer, and it doesn't have to be a specific word. It is more of a request, and it is based on their faith. And God answers, but God is the one doing the work from outside of nature. That's a convenient abstraction because if it doesn't work, the priest or whoever is in charge can say it wasn't in God's plan. And I'm not magic. So the fact that it didn't work when I tried it, I'm not magic. I can't do this.
That
This is
that is a radical distinction, though. You can
It's
call
a
it
radical
convenient.
distinction, but it was a necessary one when you could call people on their bullshit at a higher rate.
I'm gonna just leave that aside
Yeah,
because what
again,
you're
we're in the wrong spot because the
no, we're
creation.
not in the no, 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 no. We're not in the wrong spot because what you're doing, you're the one in the wrong spot. I'm not trying to argue. I'm not trying to justify what anyone else says or does. To your point, it has to be in the text. What we're looking at is what is in the text.
Yeah, and
Okay.
when we get to people invoking God's assistance, then it will be in the text.
Exactly. But my
And
entire point here is I'm trying to get you to acknowledge that this isn't magic. You can call it supernatural. You can call it bullshit, to use your word, but it is not magic. It is
well,
not an
magic is a word with
incantation.
a definition.
It-
And
yes, and you're broadening the definition to suit your needs.
I read the definition. I didn't broaden it.
No,
If
no, no. You did read the definition, and it was good that you brought it up because that helped clarify things in my own mind, the difference between invocation and incantation.
Yeah, but
and you're
invocation is still magic.
no. Okay, so
They're two
you're
different types of magic. I think that's where
oh,
you
okay.
missed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. No, no, no. See, that's where I see that you have the problem. And that's what I'm saying is that you're broadening the definition of magic in order to support your idea that all of this is hocus pocus. It's just different kinds of
I'm
hocus
pretty
pocus
sure under the
magical
definition
bullshit.
of magic that invocation is listed.
My point is that they are different things. Invocation and incantation are different things.
Well, they are.
And
We that's
okay,
the whole reason I brought that up was to
yeah.
distinguish between the two because I knew you would have a distinction, but they're both magic.
Okay, while you're looking for that, that that has been my point the entire time is I don't care if you believe in it or believe in the supernatural aspect to it. My entire point is just to get you to see that what is in the text here is radically different from everything that came before it and everything that came after it in Near East and European pagan religions because it separated, it pulled out the idea of invocation from magic and completely did away with the idea of incantation. So, yes. No, actually, no. No, no, no. Okay. Here's the problem. I think maybe, hopefully, this will clarify. Okay. So your point is that it doesn't matter if you do away with the incantation because in the invocation you're still invoking a higher power, thus it is
Exactly.
magic. Sarna's point is no, that's not what magic is or was in the pagan idea. The idea was, again, to his words, you say the right word, you do the right performance. It not it's not just that you are able to, rather you inevitably must actualize the effect. The Genesis account completely destroys that idea.
Yeah,
It
it takes
says
away the fact that it doesn't happen sometimes and gives an explanation to that is all it does.
you can't just dismiss that. You can't say
It's
that
it's
so
a
dismissively.
well, it's the thing. It's one of the hangups to the evidence in the case of.
Okay, so the
It's a
concept
no. I using that as the change in the more metamorphosis of what magic is the dismissal. It's this is the cop out. It's that well didn't work this time. I'm not magic. Magic comes from somewhere else. It's God's decision. So something else is going as at play here, and I'll do some more studying and we'll figure this out. Basically, whereas the voodoo witch doctor, you're cursed to die in 5 seconds and you're still standing there. Well, they have no explanation for that because
I messed up the ritual. I said the word the wrong way, whatever.
yeah, something along those lines. Yeah.
I,
It's
see,
just shifting the responsibility of the result is all it is.
you're looking at the problem is you're focused on the end product. My point is there is a big effing difference
Of
between the
where it came
mechanism.
from.
There's a big difference between the mechanism.
There's a difference in concept, but
Well,
in whether it
okay, okay,
exists or
okay.
not, that's why I don't
I
that's why I
just had
don't
a
think
thought.
it's a part of the creation story because we're not getting two people invoking
The, okay,
the
there's a
spiritual yet.
difference in the to your point rationalizing. So, I pray over the surgeon's hands, but it doesn't work. Well, to your point, uh, for whatever reason, God didn't answer this prayer. There's a plan. I just don't understand, but there's a difference in I don't understand why this happened. I don't understand how this happened or why God didn't answer this prayer. And well, I just did the ritual wrong or said the wrong word because
There is a
inherent
difference
in
when there. And again, it's an evolution.
Inherent in that is the idea that, but next time, or if I do it right, it will happen. By doing away with Sarna's definition of magic and divorcing, destroying the idea of incantation and divorcing invocation from the concept of magic, you have created a rationality that will inevitably lead to greater scientific understanding because you are forced to think and understand and figure out the world around you.
Well, that clockwork was already going, which is the whole reason why the religion itself metamorphosized. But again, okay, so let's do this. Going forward, let's let's toss out the word magic to begin with. And when you're speaking of invocation, we'll use the word invoke. And we can just settle the discussion here that there is no incantation in the Judeo-Christian faith. And then when something happens where it's an invocation, we will talk about that specific topic as we go through. I'm fine with vocabulary change. I can throw out the word magic. I still think invoking is magic, but if you don't think so, then we'll talk. We will speak specifically to invocation, and it's its own thing.
I don't think
Is a cookie cake a cake or a cookie?
depends on the recipe. I actually think that's a good analogy because it depends on the recipe.
Well, a real cookie cake, like
Okay.
the big chocolate chip cookie cake.
Yeah, because I have seen recipes and I have done them to where basically you just make a giant chocolate, you just make a giant chocolate chip cookie. I have
Mm-hmm.
also seen it where you add in different kinds of flour to make it more cakey.
The one that's a big giant chocolate chip cookie, is it a cookie or a cake?
It depends on the recipe. It depends
No,
on how
the
it
the
was
one
made.
the basic one with that is just a giant chocolate chip
No, no,
cookie.
no. If it is made exactly the same way as you would make a small chocolate chip cookie, then
Mm-hmm.
it's a chocolate chip cookie. My point is, and why
Is it a cookie or a cake?
I'm going a
My
different way with your analogy
my
is
reason that it's a
because
cake is because all cookies are cakes by definition.
no, that
The
that's
definition of a cookie is a small cake made with baking soda instead of baking powder. Or did I get that the other way around? Yeah, I think it's baking
it's
soda.
one or the other. It
It,
only has
it's
one.
it's it's
Yeah.
a specific way of making a cake,
And okay,
which in Britain would also be a biscuit. It's
all
again,
squares
you're
are rectangles. No,
we're
no, no.
fighting about a word.
No, but the word matters because what
No, the meaning behind the word. No, excuse me. The source of the power is the only thing that matters. Whether we call it invocation, whether we call it magic, the source of the power is where the onus, the burden of proof has to go. The source of everything and all things is where the burden of proof has to go if your hypothesis is the Genesis story of creation is correct. And this is how
okay,
you
see
make.
again, that's the hang up. That's the hang up here between us is because you're refusing to acknowledge that while it's still supernatural, the the Genesis account and the invocations to that creator are not magic because in your mind, I'm trying to say if you acknowledge this isn't magic, then you must believe it. No, I'm not. I'm just saying this is what it is. You can believe it or not, but by acknowledging that this is not magic, this is radically different from everything else that came before, you are not, you don't have to believe it. I'm just saying what is. And to your analogy, the reason I'm hung up on it's not just a word, because what I hear you saying when you say that a cookie is just a cake, it's just slightly different. Well, wait a minute. That's like saying, uh, you know, all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. And
No,
you're
no, no,
saying, it doesn't
no. You're
matter. All
talking in
rectangles are
30
squares
different
too.
circles. You're talking in 30 different circles here. Here's what I'm saying. I am saying null hypothesis is we don't know what came before everything we understand now.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying that the that God created everything and the story of creation itself is evidence of that. And I'm saying no, it's not.
What? No, I'm not. No, no, no. I'm not saying that. I'm
You're
not
saying that
saying.
it's because it's different than pagan magic is evidence of this. It
No, I'm
may not
not.
be all the evidence, but it is evidence of this.
I'm saying that based on the text, it is what it is. It says what it says.
But you're
Based
talking
on
about someone who doesn't believe the text is correct.
exactly, and that's why I don't know how we got hung up here. That I fully agree that uh uh trying to convert someone by just quoting them Bible verses is silly because they don't believe in the Bible. So they're not going to take that as an authority. That's nonsense. So I've always thought that was silly.
But you're saying that the uniqueness of the story versus what existed at the time is evidence.
No, you're inferring that.
So what are you saying?
Now,
Because this is where you came into it is this is what's special about this.
yes, it's special and different. Now, for me, that is a piece of evidence
Well, I
that
already
this is something
specified that. I said
divine.
it may not be all the evidence, but it is some evidence.
To me, it is a
Just
piece of the evidence that this is something that was divinely inspired because it is so different and so radical from anything else. You can say that, no, this is just a natural progression of religion, and then, we can go down that road. But I am not saying that be that that Genesis 1 proves that God
which
exists.
is why I'm hating that we're hung up on this magic conversation because what you just said was the road I was trying to go down.
How do you
That
mean?
well, your uniqueness is something that is actually a very sensical evolution of what already existed based on what was happening at the time. Because we need to get to the Garden of Eden because that plays into this, and this is where we were
Okay,
supposed
well
to go
then
today. Yeah,
let's get into the Garden
that's
of
why
Eden and
again
maybe that will
I
clarify.
think the magic conversation derailed everything
See, and
because
I don't. I think it's integral to my founding point, which was again, not that this proves God's existence. It's just this text in and of itself is radically different from all of its contemporaries and even stuff that came much later.
I don't think it's radically different. I think it is different. I think it is more precise than again your pagan and your nature religions. But I don't think that's radical. I think it was something that had to happen.
Yes, but something that had to happen or something that evolved from, you can look back and say step one, two, three, four, and there can still be a major difference between three and four.
Well, yeah, this is true. I never argued that. I
That's like saying, well, the forward pass is just a natural evolution of the game. Well, yeah, but it's radically different than the tosses that were being, the sweeps that were being done before the forward pass began. Yes, it's an evolution of the toss sweep, but it's a radically different. It's significantly different. Pick your adverb from the toss sweep.
but it's also at in an accelerated time frame because we have reached a radically evolving time frame in humanity as well. Everything got thrown on its head with the mainstream uh, usage of agriculture. The plow was one of the most influential inventions of all time, maybe more so than the cell phone. Right? The plow accelerated things like that. It changed how we formed families. It changed how we grouped together as people. It changed how we had our food storage, our food production. This is a time frame that was an explosion in culture. It's no surprise. It actually would make. It's not just that it makes sense that it's this evolution of it. It would surprise me if it didn't go in this direction.
to Sapolsky's point, is you're the oddball because you're the 5%, not the 95%.
Well, remember the 95% includes all world religions.
Yeah, no, yeah. But it's still the same basic idea.
It's the 5% that feel no need to try to explain things beyond what we can see, and or that's not true because we're always looking for explanations, but to attach something to the unexplained. How about that?
All right, well, let's get it. Let's put a pin in that because I totally disagree with your um analysis of the agricultural revolution, but I feel like that could be like two
Well,
whole episodes in and of
it's
itself.
what happened though.
Yeah, but your analysis of it isn't necessarily correct. So that's my only point there. But let's get into the Garden of Eden. I have new firepower. I finally got Dennis Prager's Genesis in his Rational Bible series. So he uh, is heavily influenced by Sarna, and he cites Sarna a lot, but he also has a much more modern way of phrasing things. So that will hopefully help me uh, find the more betterer words for what I'm trying to say.
Let me just point out as we go into the Garden of Eden, this is one of the things that got me down the thought path that led ultimately to my evolution of thought was notice the whole damn thing starts in a garden.
Mm-hmm.
Garden implying the word garden implying we grew it, not meadow that had a lot of fruit, not this place that had all this stuff I could find. Garden is something you
Yeah,
tend.
yeah. No,
So
that's actually an important part
from
of
the
the whole
first,
thing.
the second chapter of the first writing is agriculture. So
Yeah.
it puts you in the mind of the writer is what it does. And we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of human existence, years of human existence before this was a thought.
I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of ancient apocalypse, but you should watch that on Netflix because I do want to talk about it at some point.
Ancient, is it a movie, documentary, what?
It's a documentary. Have you seen Graham Hancock on Rogan? Rogan's a big fan of the guy.
The name sounds familiar, but I can't pinpoint it.
He's a journalist. He's not an archaeologist or anthropologist, but he's a journalist who's fascinated by megalithic structures, and his hypothesis has long been that there were um, advanced civilizations of the Stone Age that were basically wiped out by the end of the last ice age.
Oh, I think there is some evidence that's coming forward, and it's really hard because I mean this is old shit, but there is some evidence that could point in that direction, and I have seen
Yeah.
stuff on that.
We may get into that because you wanted to that after the Garden of Eden, you wanted to jump to the flood.
No, I didn't want to jump. I just
Oh,
said
okay.
that's where it's going to probably get interesting
Yes.
because of
Yeah.
those events, and we do have
Yeah,
timelines.
and that is a major component of what Hancock talks about. Um, anyway, so keep going into your thoughts on the Garden of Eden, and I'll chime in because I'm more interested in your analysis of the story.
Well, even back when I was trying to be a believer, where I was telling myself I was a believer, and my internal biases trying to push everything in that direction. The Garden
And
of
doing a better
Eden.
job of it than I was, by the way.
Well, yeah, I think I might have been doing a better job of faking it, but no, there was a lot of stubbornness. I'm a stubborn guy, so there was that. But at the same time, I really was. I don't make decisions without at least getting as much as I can, and my
Hmm.
biases were actually the opposite direction when this all started. But even then, the Garden of Eden and the Adam and Eve story always to me had to be a metaphor.
Yeah.
It had to be a metaphor. It could not be a story of something that actually happened. And this is not because of fossil records or anything like that. It's just the ridiculousness of two people making everybody. The actual making somebody, of course, the difference in magic and everything, but a man being made from dust has to be metaphorically because we're made of the same stuff as the dust and the plants and
That's actually a really good point, and the first point I want to jump in on because a major component that is lost on a lot of people that Sarna spends a lot of time on. The reason that I talked about in his prologue that he points this out that uh, that and again he was writing in the 60s for crying out loud that an explosion in understanding in archaeological findings um, were were showing that there were a lot of Near Eastern traditions that were very similar to the Genesis accounts. And there was a lot of analysis being done to say, okay, well, this wasn't the tradition was that Moses wrote the Torah himself and gave it to the Israelites. And there was a lot of analysis. Well, no, it looks like Genesis, especially the first few chapters, had multiple authors. And he made the point of, well, to me, that only enhances its importance and its uniqueness. And one of those things is that it frequently co-opts uh, uh, traditional pagan Near Eastern mythos, and he cites a number of different origin stories um, where the imagery of clay, the potter, the you know, and this is for anyone who knows the Bible. This is repeated a number of times throughout both the Old and New Testament. The idea
Mhm.
that God, like a potter, shaped us. So, uh, but one of the points of the clay idea is that um, it part of the point there is to co-opt and say, no, it wasn't, this deity or that deity, that god or that goddess from Sumer or Canaan or whatever. It was God. He did it. The other point is that it's not, don't get hung up on the dust, on the clay aspect of it. The bigger point about it is the imagery of God tangibly, physically, specially and specifically creating man. And to your point, it doesn't even matter if that's literal or holy analogy. God could be the clockmaker, the idea that a lot
Mhm.
of Renaissance thinkers has that he said everything he built the dominoes and then flicked that first one and stood back. Okay, so we could have come from a literal God creating Adam with dust, or it could be wholly and entirely macroevolutionary theory, or it could be something in the middle. The point of the story is that humanity is unique and has a special connection to the creator of the universe.
That's a loaded dice in some ways because we created this. If you're a non-believer, then your thought is, well, we created the story. Of course, we're going to connect ourselves to the creation.
Uh-huh.
So that's one of those that both sides would have both sides of the coin because it all goes back to the what created it all, or did man write this, or was is it what they say the term God breathed,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you believe it's God breathed, then God created man and everything, and there is a special connection. If you believe man wrote it, well, you think it's man's propensity to put themselves at the center of everything.
Um, true. But
And there's
again,
there's no being on earth
okay,
that can contradict us.
but again, this is why I was hung up on the word magic, because this account is distinctly different. Now you can just say, you know, that's interesting. That's
Here's why I think we're not even to magic yet, because
mhm,
magic involves, if you call invocation magic, it involves the invocation to begin with. We're still with God doing everything.
mhm,
Sans request. No
mhm,
request, no magic.
mhm.
So that's why I
Okay.
don't think we're at the magic argument yet, because you don't have the invocation yet.
Right,
There's
but
nobody to invoke anything yet.
my point was the point above that, which is that the entire reason I was hung up on the idea of magic is to illustrate how different this is. Now, let me take the other side of
I
the
concede
coin
it's
for a
different.
second.
How about that?
There was a radical departure, a radical jump in human thought from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. However, and a lot of medieval scholars have talked about this, is the Dark Ages are a silly name because they weren't actually that dark. That what occurred in the Renaissance, you can look back and you say, this stuff here, this stuff here, this stuff here, and you can draw a line, but it's not a smooth line.
Mhm.
There's a big jump in human thought, in human philosophy, in human scientific discovery and application between the Middle Ages, what we call the Middle Ages, and the Renaissance.
Well,
Okay.
let's go back to the cell phone. The cell phone is this device in our pocket that every teacher when we were kids told us would never exist because
Mm,
you'll never have a calculator in your pocket to carry around with you at all times. Uh, the cell phone is a radical invention that has exploded humanity over the last 20 years, uh, the smartphone specifically.
hmm
But the cell phone never exists without the regular phone. The regular phone never exists without the telegraph. And keep going down the line,
Yeah.
the gap between inventions gets narrower and narrower and narrower till you get to the end product, and then you see an explosion. Same thing with the Dark Ages and the Renaissance. The printing press, things like that, here and there, all along the way, and then you get to the Renaissance. Everything just kind of came together, and boom, explosion. Also, the introduction of caffeine that helped. Uh, we stopped
Yeah.
being we
That was
stopped
funny.
being buzzing all
Yeah.
day on beer because it was safer than water, and we started drinking tea, which you boil first, and coffee and things like that. And all of a sudden, all these things that were happening slowly happened very quickly. So
Yeah.
don't discount that.
I say as I think we should pause so I can pour another drink, but no, let's keep going. Um, uh, to, all the way back to where I got going off on this tangent, but it's not a tangent. Um, to your point that yeah, if you are creating a religion, if you are doing something different, you're going to say, well, of course, we are specially connected to this creator God that this text says exists and that we should follow. Uh, rather than, to the illustration we used earlier, the Pharaoh. This is different. So the Pharaoh says, "I am God." The Jews say, "We are specially connected to God." Okay, but in the creation, that is radically different from uh, other creation stories. If you look at other cosmologies and their creation mythos, uh, man is created out of something by gods to be tools for the gods, or to satisfy the gods' needs. The idea of serving Yahweh God, creator God of the Jews, comes later. In the creation mythos itself, we are specially created. While he said, "Let there be," uh, in Genesis chapter 1, in chapter 2, it is now focusing in on the creation of man, and whether it's literal or figurative, it doesn't matter, because the point is we have a special connection. We are different from all the other points of creation. Uh, in fact, where is it? We'll get to that later.
Well, and let me make a distinction here too from again my perspective as we go through this. I use the word evolution specifically, and I hate the misconception people have about
Hmm.
evolution, that it's 100% completely random mutations over time and everything is by chance. That is part of it, but it's actually a small part of it. It's sexual selection, it's survival of the fittest. It is all these other things that are not random. If I am, you know, evolving as a being, we'll look at Darwin's finches, right? And this male eats more nuts because his beak is a little bit stronger. They're going to live longer. And I'm going to notice that as the female, and I'm going to take that male as my partner and create even stronger kids. And eventually the bill evolves into a better nut cracking bill, right? So same, we do it as humans. We have unconscious cues, symmetry of the face. That's not only good genetics, but it's also a sign that at a young age you were able to obtain nutrients. So you either have a good family structure, because we humans need that because we evolve so slowly or grow so slowly, and you're able to provide for yourself. So you have this unconscious cue of facial symmetry that people are going to. So these things aren't random. A mutation that makes you even more so might be random, but that's the smallest part of evolution. Now, you brought up multiple authors versus Moses and everything. Evolution of this is not that one person wrote this book centralizing us. Evolution of this is many people over many thousands of years, yeah, a couple thousands of years in this case, probably looking
Mhm.
at the flood timelines and stuff, several thousand years once writing started becoming a thing, created a story that coalesced together over time and people built on each other's work. Now, the centralizing man is the human tendency to centralize yourself. We did it with the sun. We thought the sun revolved around us, not just because it kind of looked like it, but because we put ourselves at the center of the universe. That's just the tendency of humanity to do so. So over the course of time, as this story evolved into its final product, the tendency of man is going to play through to a large degree. And when we get to things like the Ten Commandments, where we talk about pro-social behavior versus anti-social behavior, the tendency of man can figure out the rules and put it into story. And that's, I think, the evolution is the perfect word, because it's a process that's not completely random, other than maybe a revolutionary thought here and there that stuck because it was more right than what was already there, like your humans cannot be godlike. That was probably a revolutionary thought based on observation. It was probably the first person to notice that a promise that the pharaoh made, or whoever was in charge, whatever society that started in, didn't really come true, and that was actually more the pattern than things that actually worked.
So I wanted to your point, because you make a good point that that I get annoyed with talking to actual believers who have trouble with this concept. I like the way Prager states it here. So this is chapter 3 of Genesis in his Rational Bible series. One of the most common objections to taking the Torah seriously, let alone as divine text, is the seeming impossibility of taking some of its stories literally. Aside from creation in 6 days, probably the most frequently cited example is the Garden of Eden story. Only religious fundamentalists, the argument goes, could possibly believe there was an actual Garden of Eden, actual people named Adam and Eve, and a snake that spoke. I have never been troubled by this issue. If there is a God who created the universe, he could surely create a serpent that could communicate. Therefore, for those who accept the God of Genesis 1, there should be no issue here. And for those who reject the creator of Genesis 1, there's also no issue here. Since there is no God, there was no Garden of Eden, no revelation at Sinai, and none of the other non-provable events described in the Torah. Having said that, I was taught by my Orthodox Torah teacher, Rabbi Abnam Haram. Oh man, those words are hard words to say. Of the yeshiva at Flatbush High School, that one need not take the Garden of Eden literally. Even an Orthodox Jew could regard the story as divinely conceived parable intended to teach about the nature of the human soul. Nor was this a singular view, which this is how I've always taken it, and it's not like I
Mhm.
invented this idea, but
Well,
there
like I
are
said,
plenty of
even
philosophers out there.
when I was doing my best to bias towards belief, it was like
Mhm.
this has to be parable, this has to be metaphor, because there's no reason this makes any sense otherwise.
Yeah, and even if you took it literally, there are plenty of outs, so to speak, where you could uh, rationalize how it could fit into the natural world. So I've always found the people who get hung up on the genealogies or hung up on the specifics and okay, well, so the world is only 6,000 years old. No, there are plenty of gaps in there. In even if you take Genesis chapter 1 and 2 literally, there are plenty of gaps where we are not told the details because that's not what's important here.
Mm-hmm.
Moving along.
Moving along.
But I do think it was important to start from the point of, yeah, this could totally be metaphor. This doesn't have to be literal to be important. It doesn't even have to be literal to be divine.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It
So
does not. Yeah. I mean, no, you're right. It does not. Uh, which is why I think the case. I mean, you have the harder case here. That I won't deny. I'm not rationalizing everything for my own benefit. I'm rationalizing everything because in most cases there's a rational answer. The harder case is on the believer to make it because it is an abstraction. You have to there's very little to draw on that isn't something that we've learned a lot about. And again, this is why I hate the Berlinski argument, is because he baited these non-believers into trying to prove him wrong. I can't prove you wrong, but I'm not trying to prove you wrong. I'm just giving you, as we go forward and you explain realistically on your side why the misconceptions of what we think of as the Bible versus what was probably actually written there and what it actually probably means, which is why you're invoking Sarna, why you're going to these old translations. Because evangelicals are easy to talk with, not because it's an easy conversation from a congenial type relationship conversation, but the fact that they always fall back on, well, you just need to believe because in some way, shape, or form. Even to the argument of, well, what if you're wrong? Well, I can't believe because what if I'm wrong?
I have always hated that argument. That is,
Yeah.
I don't know who, I have no idea who put them up. There are billboards up to that effect on I-35, and they drive me bananas. Of, you know, it's something to the effect of, you think hell doesn't exist. What if you're wrong? Okay, well, that is the stupidest reason to to convert, to become a believer. Um, and I've heard Crowder and his head minion make the same point, and it just drives me nuts. That is so stupid.
But also tropes like, well, we're perfectly designed in God's image. And then I think of everything about human anatomy that actually makes us perfectly designed to go against the teachings of this. That I'm like, well, either we're perfectly designed and you wrote the wrong book, or we
I think
wrote
you need
the
to expound on that, because that's going to be kind of a fundamental point
well, yeah,
of what you mean by.
or we wrote the right book to take into account all these things that we're designed to do that are imperfect for how society was going. Again, I tie this to culture because the nature of what was the Middle Eastern culture then expanded to European culture and then worldwide after that. Things that were designed to do not work as well in close proximity, high population societies. You know, that's why I'm putting together my secular 10 commandments to go along with the regular 10 commandments, because this thing, thou shalt not. Well, a lot of times it's natural. Let's use a nutrition example. I am designed to crave an Oreo cookie because the Oreo cookie has fat, salt, and carbohydrates and a lot of calories. Well, in a day and age where I can eat Oreo cookies anytime I want, as long as I can make a few bucks here and there, that's going to be bad for my body. But my body's designed to do it. Now we look at mating behaviors amongst males and females and how we go about that and how it's not pro-social to give in to your hormones if your neighbor's wife is the target, right? That's going to cause social problems. And this evolved over time to solve social problems and to make a cohesive society. And then the fact that you have on top of it is God wants it to be this way. Now you've got the ultimate motivation. The bigger society's got, the more God's got away from explaining nature and more towards explaining human morality. Again, a natural evolution based on how people were living.
It's interesting that from the beginning you've kind of been making those, those points because in the prologue to the first book in the series, that's what Prager writes about Exodus. This is why he labeled the series the rational Bible. That was his point, is all of these commandments, and not just the Ten Commandments, but then the more detailed stuff down the road, was focused on creating a well-ordered, productive society.
Well, let's do this going forward then. Let's make this less of a debate, except for maybe over finer points, and more of a this is what was written. This is where it comes from the old
Mhm.
text, and this is why it reinforces my belief. I'm speaking as you. This is why it reinforces my belief because X, Y, Z as we go forward. And then I basically give the secular answer to that. And again, if it makes people just scratch their chin and go, and they see two different sides of the argument and they fall on one side or the other, that's adults making adult decisions.
Um, the other thought I had while you were talking is so the macro point of, it's interesting you say that because this was Prager's point in his prologue for the Exodus book, which was the first book. But he also makes that point here at the end of the jumping to the end of the Garden of Eden, which is that notice that only two things are cursed here, or are said to be cursed. So the serpent is cursed. That word is used. You are cursed because the serpent deceived. The serpent,
Mm-hmm.
enacted, didn't cause all this, but instigated all this. And then when he's talking to Adam, God doesn't curse Adam. The ground is cursed. And that's an interesting thing to note because, as Prager points out, and his reading of this, and what my reading always was this is simply a statement of humanity. This is simply a statement of reality,
Mm-hmm.
that nature is harsh and it requires hard work, and there's going to be pain and suffering. Um, and that's not a curse. That simply is what is. Adam, you are going to have to toil. Uh, Eve, your childbirth the pangs are going to be increased. And one of the more interesting kind of essays he has here is so the and I was wondering if you had any thought, if were going to focus on this as well. Whoops, I'm in the wrong chapter. Chapter 3 here. Okay, so when he's talking to Eve, um, so this is chapter 3, verse. Where is it? Here we are. So 3:16. So this is where he's talking to Eve, to the woman who wasn't even named yet. Um, he said, I will make most severe your pangs in childbearing. In pain shall you bear children. Yet your urge shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. So these two later statements, your urge for your husband and he shall rule over you, um, have long been used as points of contention by feminists, especially, to denounce the Bible, which there's a couple of problems here. First, by focusing in on chapter 3, verse 16, you completely ignore the speciality of Eve's creation in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
That in chapter 2, when Eve is created, it is even more special than when Adam is created. is a point that Prager makes, and he really drills down on that. But to this point, uh, and he goes kind of on a longer essay here, citing uh various studies and whatnot. Um, he cites one that is evolutionary psychologists claim that women prefer dominant partners because such men have superior genes. Evidence has shown that women prefer more dominant men when they themselves are at the most fertile point of their menstrual cycle, whereas most men do not similarly seek out dominant women. Uh, and he makes the point of you ask a man, uh, if you found a woman who was smart, physically attractive, uh, you got along with great, but she didn't have a good career. She didn't make a lot of money. Would you still be interested in her? Yeah. You ask a woman that question? No. Probably not.
Well, this might be a good segue into that little bit of sexy time that I had, and then we can close it out because I have a client in 30 minutes.
Okay.
But there's a lot of ways. So first of all, me and Prager said the same thing, but it's a statement that can be taken two completely different roads. Whereas, again, he takes it as evidence. I take it as this is the way. This is just explaining something that naturally happens. This is just man's way of trying to attach explanation to something that naturally happens. And that's the disconnect. Without that first hub of it came from here, you either go down the road of, well, we're just this was going to happen anyways. We just kind of have a little bit of a guidebook that's developed over the years, whereas he believes that this is a guidebook because of higher power. And so that's the two roads you go down. And again, one leads to even reinforce the secular, because the more we understand, the more that things we took on articles of faith, the more we say, oh, well, this was the natural way of things anyways, in what was becoming an unnatural world for man. This is the transition between what was the natural world, what was man evolving into hunter gatherer and then coming together. The ground you shall toil. This is, again, as speaking as metaphor, as parable, the transition from probably living in uh, places of abundance. We all man came from Africa, and there are parts of Africa that aren't the Sahara,
Mm-hmm.
that aren't the savannah. They are very plentiful in nutrients and in resources. This and weather patterns changed over time. We know the Sahara was once underwater, not just from a flood, but actually permanently underwater, right? So we're going through this change in environment, whether that was from migration or from weather pattern changes, where we also learned how to work the earth, which is agriculture. Again, this whole thing starts with agriculture. We were learning to work the earth versus just pick shit up from it. And so there's the evolution there. But for the woman, if you read this from an evolutionary standpoint, not only will your desire be for your husband, but once you've satisfied that desire and you have the repercussion of that, the difference between humans and most other animals is the female becomes dependent on the male for resources at that point. I don't know about you, but have you ever gone in and hunted while having a baby strapped to your back, right? It's not going to work out very well, because even if you manage to have the endurance and strength to do it, the baby's going to cry and scare the animal away. Same for gathering. Have you carried 100 pounds of tubers back to your tribe while carrying a baby at the same time, right? There is a period of time that the woman becomes dependent on the man after the desire part is taken care of, in a day and age where there was no such thing as birth control, right? So this statement does make sense from that. And again, from an overtime observation and then collection of work, there's no surprise that would come up in a text that evolved along with this. This is not one text. There's a reason it's broken up into books. right?
Yep. It's saying something about human nature.
Mhm.
It is telling the reader that this is who you are. And I think next time we're stay in the Garden of Eden because uh, this is a bone of contention I have with some particular sects of Christianity is I don't think there's any way to read the Garden of Eden story and adhere to a predeterminist ideology. To me, the entire point of the Garden of Eden story is that humans have free will and it has positives and it has negatives, but it's just who we are. That what sets us apart is that we are free to choose. And here are what the consequences of that are.
And let's put a pin in that. Let me write a note. Free will and the Garden of Eden, because that gets us into our, is it free as we think it is?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this a compilation of text to actually help us evolve from the things we impulsively do based on our nature? And free will in the Garden of Eden, this the little tease in it is she impulsively ate from the delicious looking fruit when that's not always the best idea, especially in a culture that's evolving to be more social. Uh, and again, to add an ever apocalyptic story, for lack of a better word, to it, just hammers that point home for anybody reading it.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if I was to write a metaphor about overcoming our nature to live together as a society, that would be a pretty damn good one.
Mm-hmm.
But now things are changing. You brought up feminists, and I think that's the good segue, because now I needed to give my explanation of why ruling over you could be something completely natural without being a sexist pig. Where we've reached a day and age where that's not necessarily the case, especially in weird societies, Western
Mm-hmm.
industrial societies. In fact, it's getting easier and easier and easier to either A, not have children, or if you do have a child, to be able to take care of that child. You know, extended maternity leaves that where you can't lose your job, or daycare systems and that take younger and younger and younger children. You know, all of these things that have developed over time have made it easier to go the other way. And we're starting to see some of the effects of that. And female choice is changing based on that. And this is a tease into probably a big sexy time with Sam Talk, because it's starting to mess things up. Speaking of lots of people living, sorry about the dog there, lots of people living in a society that's based on a certain code of ethics or better way of doing things. Remember, we talked about polyamory, and I said, and I was making that case, but I said polygamy couldn't exist in Western society, and it kind of took you aback for a second. It's because it's not the best plan for how we live, because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise a certain percentage of the men are going to get most of the females, and you're going to have a large portion of men that are left without uh, this thing. And in tribal situations, most of the time, it would be an older man marrying younger women, and that older man had spent most of his young adult male life warring with other cultures and raiding and doing all of these and hunting dangerous animals. So the serious lack of men of a marrying age makes it very possible and probably a good strategy to have a polygamous society, because then you would have lots of lonely women, because they're not put through the same dangers. They're not expected to go raid. They're not expected to go hunt wildebeests where they could get eaten by a lion. Or in some tribes, you're not a man unless you go kill a lion by yourself. How many men make it through that when you're armed with only a spear? Right. So that makes sense in that society. And then we have Islamic societies where you still have kind of a supported polygamous class. Well, you got a lot of lonely men. Guess who's easy to convince to go be a suicide bomber because there's 40 virgins in heaven? That guy that has no option for women in real life.
Mm.
So you have a society where it actually benefits the society for that, in some cases very negative ways. In the tribal way, that's a little bit positive once you get to that age. I don't agree with the warring and the raiding, but I don't live there and I don't have to, feed my family with it. The other one, we can both agree that that's probably not the best thing for this world. But Western society, well, what are you going to do in that situation? Well, guess what? Now we have freedom from the uh, consequences of bearing child versus a man. Man never had consequences other than making the choice to stick around or not, right?
Hmm.
So we have freedom from that. Whether that's birth control or the after effects, the things that are going through. And guess what we have? We have we got some statistics here from
Are these the stats of how women are unhappier than they've ever been?
this is one of the reasons why.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
and we're
so
not allowed
this
to talk about this, but I mean that's the point of this story is that um one of the slogans of 60s feminism was, or maybe this came out in the 70s when it started to get more radical, is a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Okay, except what you're saying with your slogan there is that a woman needing a man is unnatural because a fish needing a bicycle is unnatural. But
okay. So
everything we know about humanity says, no, that's what's unnatural.
here's the latest data from Bumble. This is height, and this is the where they're setting. So this is where they set the minimum height for their, and so this is the range. So anybody above that, so it actually gets taller as you go this way.
Hmm.
Anybody above is obviously going to be still in the filter because you put a minimum.
Hmm.
So the range here, this is the most popular. I'm going to scroll down here in a second, but do you want to guess where this is?
I'm gonna guess that's like
That
6
peak,
to 6'2".
that peak one. What would you guess that is?
I'm gonna guess that's 6 to 6'2".
6 to 6'2".
Hmm.
6'6".
Woo!
6 foot
At a
four to six foot
minimum.
six is at a minimum is where most of the filters are set at
Do
this
these
time.
people have any idea what the average height of a man is?
Now there's a little bit of selection bias, and you touched on it earlier. The Bumble tends to be more successful women by
Hmm.
by the demographic,
Okay.
but the data shows that 60 men swipe right 60% of the time, women swipe right 6% of the time.
Hmm.
So
That's across multiple apps, right? Doesn't that data come from multiple
yeah, that's
apps?
multiple apps. Yeah.
Mhm.
So this was just Bumble. 6 foot 4 to 6 foot 6 is the biggest range, 6 foot 6 being the peak. Let's
Wow.
go to male height in a normal distribution. There's the mean. What's 71 inches?
Uh, hold on. Brain. Wait. Wait, what? No, that can't be right. So 70 inches is 5 foot, isn't it?
No, 60 inches is 5 foot.
60 inches is 5 foot. Derp.
Yeah, 72 is 6 foot.
72 is 6 foot. Okay. Oh, it's more than I thought it would be. So it's,
Yeah.
'cause
Now
I thought average male height was
now this
still
is this is worldwide.
okay. Okay.
Average male height in the US is 5'9", five
Okay.
foot
I
nine and a half.
I thought it was 5'8" to 10, somewhere in that range. So worldwide, it's just under 6 foot.
So yeah, it's just under 6 foot, and that includes the Dutch, which are the tallest in the world, which is just over 6 foot. But the worldwide is just under 6 foot. The American average is 5'9". 14.5% of men are 6 feet or over. Less than 1% is over 6'4", or 6'4" is the marker for 1%. It's two standard deviations away. So women have just boxed themselves into 1% of men, or the few percent that are lying about it till the first date. Guess
That's a
what
lot.
happens in that situation?
You have a lot of very frustrated and disappointed women.
Uh, from a relationship standpoint,
Hmm.
but you have basically a ruling class of very tall, good-looking, probably men that are getting
Oh yeah.
96%
If that
of the
is
swipes.
achieved, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, there's that means well, because it's going to be a range. There's going to be a bell curve around that 96, but around it's probably going to follow a normal Pareto distribution where 20% of the men are going to get 80% of the resources, which is female attention. And that's not good for relationship building.
Hmm.
And that's not good for happy young men. And
This is what Peterson has been harping on and keeps getting criticized for, and it drives him nuts. And when you watch him in interviews talk about this, is that he says repeatedly, I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm saying this is what is, and if you don't address it, it leads to even worse things.
mhm. So we're actually going into what is unofficially a polygamous society because, yeah, these men aren't marrying these women, but the other men aren't getting a shot.
Hmm.
And so women are either getting old single or they're every once in a while lucking out that one of these other guys stick around. Because if you're
Well,
getting,
because at some point he probably will, after he's gone through
mm-hmm,
enough partners to satiate himself and he's reached a point of maturity where he's like, I prioritize different things now. So yeah, you're good. I'll settle down with you.
and how long does that take? Because you're actually facilitating a sort of psychopathy. You're learning psychopathy as the man. What incentive is there for you to change your behavior if there's a constant match showing up? You've got 10 new matches today.
Yeah.
Beautiful, 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 and then you've already set up your whole weekend, which you
Hmm.
probably stood up 3 of them because you narrowed down your decision after you already set the dates. Trust me, I know these people. I've watched it live. In fact, I had to hit one of them over the back of the head because I recognized one of my former client's daughters on his screen. And I was like, no, no, you're not allowed. He has lots of guns.
Yeah. And to the what sparked all this, the point here is that this is happening because for decades now we have defied definitive observational facts about human nature
Mm-hmm.
and said, no, we are so advanced now. We are so evolved and smart. We can throw away and overcome human nature. No, we can't. We can recognize we have learned more about human nature, but again, to Peterson's point, you'd better recognize it if you want to deal with it.
I think that's a good place to end. I think this got a little bit more focused of a conversation as we went along.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think we can go a lot deeper into the how we ended the conversation in a social
Yeah.
episode because I mean there are all these underlying things to include what we brought up before with the dropping of testosterone in males
Hmm.
and there's so many factors that go into it and realistically why we're probably with a situation like that as it goes on we're going to see things like crime rates amongst young males. Now there's a buffer for that. We may be getting a buffering effect from sitting in your basement eating Cheetos, playing war games, Call of Duty and stuff, which kind of not only takes the testosterone out of the male, but gives them a diversion from the street.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's only inevitable that enough little boys are going to get pissed off.
Yeah,
Uh,
and we'll back up a little bit too because there are some interesting things about in chapter 2 about the creation of man, about the creation of Adam, and then the creation of woman, that speak to that idea of an innate instinctive nature that we have within us.
all right. Well, I'm gonna have to call it. Hopefully, this got more skin, more chin scratching, and I don't know when we're gonna do the next one because tomorrow's Thanksgiving.
Yeah, we may finally upload that one that we haven't uploaded yet.
Oh yeah, I could do that. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Talk to you
See
later.
y'all next time.